All right, welcome everybody. I'm excited to see you here on this Tuesday afternoon in June 2026. I am thrilled to be introducing Roslyn Esperon from the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore, or the Walters Museum of Art. Oh shoot, I don't have a script. It
You
is an
got it
art
right.
museum.
Yeah.
It's called the Walters, and it's in Baltimore. It's fantastic. You should check it out. But today we're going to hear from Roslyn, who has some data to share with us, specific to differences between types of data collection, right? The methodologies that we use. You've heard the COVES team talk about it. You've probably read something from the COVES team about the importance of methodology. And we're going to hear from someone else who's done some explorations into data, specifically between exit-intercept methods and email methods, because that is a thing, right? And we've talked a lot about it. Without over-explaining, we're just going to be talking about why these two things matter, recognizing that regardless of the project you're involved in or the methods that you choose, all of these different strategies have pros and cons. And we could probably come up with a lot of them from the COVES example too, right? How staffing can be hard and et cetera, et cetera. But I just want to recognize that there's value in all of these, and I'm excited to look into the data to see what else we can learn about some of these pros and cons, and hopefully that stirs up some questions for you all. My thought is that we're going to have 20 to 30 minutes of presentation, and then we can go into Q&A or just observations in general. So do take notes, but otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Roslyn.
Okay, lovely. And I'm gonna do that whole technology share screen. I hope it works. Cross your fingers. Let me know if it shows up. Okay.
Looks good. We see.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, COVES team, for inviting me to be a part of our community of practice meeting today. Um, in past meetings, you've heard Ryan talk about methodology and the methodology behind COVES. That is to say, our random sampling method and intercept procedure. And today, I'm going to talk with you about how the Walters has applied that sampling method to other large-scale survey data collection. And so I want to be clear, this is a session about using different methodologies and how that's impacted our data. It's not meant to be a how-to guide. And this is really meant to be a sharing of candid learnings and kind of works in progress. And when I think about methodologies, I think back to, and I might get this wrong, Ryan, but one of maybe our VSA conversations, presentations, maybe 2 virtual VSAs ago, when Ryan did a whole download on like codes via QR code, via in-person intercepts, via kiosk, which was fantastic. So if you have that in the back of your head like I do, you might see some connections here too. And if you haven't seen that, please do, because I think it was excellent. So let's see if the slides change. There we go. But first, a little orientation. Welcome to the Walters. And the Walters is known for its welcome, so it's only proper that we start there. The Walters Art Museum is located in Baltimore, Maryland, on the native lands of the Piscataway and the Susquehannock Nations. And our museum opened to the public in 1934. It houses a collection that was made by a father-son team, the Walters. And we steward over 30,000 objects in this, I'm going to say, brutalistic style building, one of 5 different style buildings that make up our campus. And so I joined the Walters in 2022 as their first internal evaluator. And my mandate at that point in time was to build a culture of evaluation and research at the museum. When I came to the museum, the Walters had been hiring external contractors to do evaluation for specific temporary exhibition projects where they could kind of bake that into the grant funding they were getting for those shows. And they also, prior to my arrival, launched a museum exit survey in 2019, and it looked like this. It was a self-service kiosk used for our exit survey. You can kind of see it's at where our front desk is. You can see that it harks back to some COVID era times with our clean, dirty stylus section. And so there's some pros and cons to this method. And I promise we'll get into kind of the bigger picture in a second, but I wanted to start with how we've historically done data collection. So some of the pros to this were that low staffing needs, although that also meant that, frankly, I didn't check the survey all the time to make sure that it was working, and sometimes it wasn't. But it also meant that it opened us up to some self-selection bias in who was taking the survey, and it was really unclear if who was taking the survey was a representative of our audience. So if you think about members or multiple repeat visitors, are they going to take this survey more than once? Are we going to get their voices weighted as heavily as they are coming in? Not really sure. So when I learned about COVES, I was thinking about the random sample intercepts. So in our move over to COVES, we did this. We moved to a random sample intercepting process. And here you see the inside doors of our lobby with this lovely red line that I've made in PowerPoint over it. This is our invisible red line that indicates the person who is walking across this line. When their toes hit that line, that's the first person you're going to intercept on their way towards the exit, but not at the exit because you've already lost them if they've gotten that far. So why random intercepts? This gives us a chance to kind of avoid some sampling bias. It also gives us a more accurate picture of our data, and to sum it up, it's better and more reliable data. So as the Walters has moved from 2019 to 2026, we've been moving in this direction, trying to improve the data quality that we have been getting through our evaluation. And that brings us to the Walters' participation in the AM annual survey of museum goers. Maybe like you, the Walters has been participating in this survey since 2019. Looks like looks like the Walters got into its evaluation phase right then and there. So we have some nice pre-COVID data, some post-COVID data. And we had been doing this the same way for multiple years. We had been sending out this survey to our email list and getting responses back, being excited that anyone responded, and moving forward. What I didn't tell you about the Walters is that we're a free museum, which means I'm not actually asking for your email address when you come to the museum. Our email is like one or two layers down that funnel. So who's on our email address and who's walking into the museum, there's quite a barrier to get from one to the other. So after thinking about all of these methods, we decided to try something new. And we piloted this in 2024 and then moved forward with it in 2025. So in our survey, we continued to send it out via email to our e-newsletter recipients, but we also used our random sampling method. We had 531 email respondents and 101 intercept respondents. I would be remiss to not address at this point in time that we've also talked in this community practice call about sample size. And you might be wondering why 101 random intercepts. And I have to say, this is just a practical, how many can we get in with the resources that we have in the time that we have to do it. So I want to acknowledge that if we had more time, more people, would we try for more to reduce our margin of error? Yes. But can we actually reach the COVES number that gets us to that nice 5% margin of error within the time we have? No. So we are doing our best with 101 intercepts over the course of 2 months of being on the floor. And when I brought this deck to our leadership and to the Walters Museum, I wanted to call out the differences between our two methodologies. One, sending to our email list. Again, so many hoops to get through to get to our email list. You must really like the Walters if you are on our email list. You must have some other characteristics about you that might put you on an email list versus social media, for some other way of being in touch with us. So we wanted to take that kind of hypothesis about what our email list audience looked like and pair that with this actual data coming from our random intercepts on the ground. So that's what we did. And I want to start off by describing the biggest difference between our email respondents and our intercept respondents, and that is age. Nearly half of our email respondents were age 70 or over, whereas nearly half of our intercept visitors are under age 30. And regardless of margin of error, this was a huge difference in percentages that we were seeing between these two audiences, or what I'm coming to understand as two very different audiences. And so this is also a big life stage difference. And we're going to see the difference, the impact of those life stage differences and how our two audiences answered questions related to the AAM survey about their museum experience and about their museum going practices generally. So this is our biggest difference, but it's going to play out in all of the other slides too. So the difference in age impacted our diversity, the diversity we see represented in these two audiences. And we know, true for the US as a whole, younger generations tend to be more diverse than older generations. We know that older generations for the Walters were more likely to be on our newsletter. They're skewing heavily white, whereas our intercepts were younger and more likely to represent diverse backgrounds. That generational difference also plays out in gender and LGBTQ+ identity. And our gender divide for our intercepts is actually closer to what we see in the US population generally, where our email respondents were more often identifying as women. Younger intercepts audiences were also much more likely to identify as being part of the LGBTQ+ community. Again, another reflection on data related to generation and more of that Gen Pop representation. But these two audiences did share some similar characteristics when it came to education and politics. They're both highly educated. Over 70% have completed a 4-year degree looking at our email, or looking at both email and in-person intercepts. And about 2/3 identify as being liberal on our political spectrum here. The two audiences also had some similar household compositions. But as you think about the skew in age and how that's playing out, they're in different life stages. So we're expecting to see that reflected in family status. 1 out of every 10 respondents identified as being a parent or a guardian to a child or children under age 18. And those intercepts were much more likely to say that they did not have a dependent, a person under 18 in their family. And so our email respondents tended to have older kids, and those intercept respondents who had kids tend to have younger kids. The life stage of these two audiences also impacts their museum visitation practices. And Susie Wilkening, who is the person behind the AAM survey and is, I feel like, a database in our brain about all of the things that one can learn about museum audiences, often talks about instances and frequencies based on generation. And so here what we're seeing is that our older email audiences tend to visit more museums per year than our younger intercepted audiences. And it's true for visitors to the Walters as well. Our email respondents were coming to the Walters more frequently in a given year, half of them coming twice or more, whereas our intercepts were coming more like once a year. And I also want to clarify this 17% of I've never been to this museum before, because the way this question was worded about visiting the museum in the past year means that when you're intercepting people on the ground, you could be intercepting first-time visitors, tourists, folks who have not been in the prior year, or have not visited this museum in person. So A little bit of wonkiness here, but that is that is kind of how that 17% comes to be. So a part of this is trying to understand, okay, who are these visitors and what other differences do we see? Because they're either on our email or they're in person visiting. What makes people come to the Walters more or less frequently? So we looked at their proximity to the museum. And to be transparent, this question did not specify a means of transportation. So, walking, riding car, riding the bus. That said, all of our intercepts in blue kind of fall into two notable categories. About half who live within 30 minutes of the museum, those being kind of our casual visitors, younger, coming less frequently during a given year, or those who live in a quarter who live about 4 hours or more away from the museum. And so that is our tourist segment. Our email respondents tend to live between 15 to 60 minutes away from the museum. So let's graph that. That's what that looks like. There you have Baltimore City, which is a county in itself. Baltimore County, a little confusing, a county in itself. And when we map that out to a driving distance, we see that our casual visitors are more likely to come from Baltimore City and surrounding suburbs, unless they're tourists. But our email respondents are much more likely to live in the counties surrounding Baltimore City. Now I'm going to pause here for a second because if you live in Baltimore City, you would know that our city demographics and our county demographics are quite different. And so our city demographics are majority Black. They are less educated. Our city is less educated compared to the county, less economically vibrant. We have a whole host of kind of differences between the city and its social, racial, economics, and the surrounding counties, which tend to be older, whiter, wealthier, more educated. So that's what we're seeing reflected in geography, not just people's self-responses as well. As part of the AAM survey, we also explore not just kind of the demographics, but also the satisfaction and the reason why people are coming to museums. So why did they visit the Walters? So curiosity and learning are at the top of the charts for both groups. But our email respondents, those county dwellers, are making a trip because they want to see something specific to their interests. They are coming deliberately, intentionally, whereas our local casual visitors are more likely to come to have fun. And if you think about our demographics and our age and thinking about social the interest in having a social time and family time, that also kind of pairs with that younger demographic that are coming in pairs. So we see that methodology is showing us multiple audiences, is showing us multiple behaviors, is showing us multiple interests. We're going to keep going along these lines. What motivates your visit? Here, again, we're seeing them what really nudges folks who are on our email listserv is having a program, a special exhibition, an event that gives them that extra reason to come. They're looking for something that sparks, again, is related to an existing interest. And our younger casual visitors still want to have those social experiences. They care a little less about having programs or new exhibitions to see. They're inclusive of our tourist demographic, which may not even know what's on view or what programs are happening when they arrive. Now that said, there are some things that our audiences compliment us on, which is our engaging exhibits. And this was our highest ranked group, our highest ranked quality by both groups on what the Walters does well. But if we look a few layers down, we can see that our email respondents think that the museum contributes to their community's quality of life. that kind of big encompassing concept of how museums work in society. Whereas intercepts, our younger demographic, feels like staff make them feel welcome, and that welcome is what they appreciate about the museum. In this survey, respondents were asked how the museum should engage with content. And this survey is the 2025 survey, so this part of the survey changes annually, and maybe you have some of this data as well. So learning was a top priority for our audiences, for both of our audiences. But we see that we also see some of those audience-specific motivations coming into play. Email respondents, again, wanted to know more about things they already knew something about. Intercepts wanted to create shared memories, that social aspect, again, showing up in our data. And motivations come through in the types of activities that our audiences wanted. So generally, they want to explore, sit, eat, talk, all those regular things. But our email respondents were again drawn to scheduled activities and events. They're coming from further away. They're getting our newsletter. They're aware of these opportunities to come visit the museum. Our intercepts are coming to the museum for these social casual reasons. They're looking for photo ops, materials that spark group interaction. They also gave us some feedback. How do we improve? So good news here is that about half or more respondents said that we were doing a good job. No notes. But among those who gave feedback, email respondents wanted more of what motivated them to visit. Programs, exhibitions, and specifically things for seniors. Intercepts didn't quite feel as strongly. Again, they're less likely to come as frequently. They're less aware of the offerings that we already have. They're regular walk-in visitors. We also wanted to get a sense of what the biggest barriers were to attendance. So I want you to picture yourself as a member of our email newsletter list, perhaps a 70-year-old woman who is driving to the Walters from Baltimore County. Your biggest barrier is parking, followed by the distance to get here. And this has been consistently true for us. I would be so curious to know if this is consistently true for you as well. Now, if you were intercepted for this survey, different methodology, you fall into one of two camps. You're either a tourist living 4+ hours away, or for the most part, you think you're visiting just the right amount of time. But yeah, parking could be better for you too. Other ways that we could support our audience differed based on those audiences. So thinking about our methodology, kind of revealing multiple needs and our audience needs to us. Our email respondents had fewer requests, but their requests were different. They wanted support for aging and for those with physical or mobility issues. Those were primary for that group. Our intercepts were looking for support with mental health, sensory sensitivities, language barriers. Our intercepts being more representative of our general attendance, showing that younger demographics skew and more diverse demographic skew. So I'm getting towards the end, but to sum it up, we also asked about the role of museums and community. And so here are some of those responses. We didn't see as much difference here. And that's great because it meant that all of our audiences see a lot of value in the work that we do, rather whether they're a casual visitor that we've intercepted or a museum loyalist who has signed up for our email newsletter, actually read the newsletter, opened our survey, and answered the survey. So all of the hoops that they went through for us. And so at the end, I just want to show you how I presented this then to our Walters staff. Our AAM survey, because we used two different methods to collect this data, didn't just reveal one set of data that gave us one audience. It revealed two different sets of data with two different audiences that we could learn about. Our intercepts, skewing younger, live nearby, visit once a year, coming for those social experiences, already feeling really welcome, have some desires for more sensory, mental health support, and language needs, and are more inclusive and representative of our broader community in terms of age, LGBTQ plus status, and gender. Our email respondents, completely different audience. They're more likely to live in the county. They skew older. They come multiple times per year. And yes, they come multiple times per year and still have parking issues. This is a question that I've gotten before. They see museums as having a deep social community contribution, societal contribution, but they come for specific reasons, specifically things they're already interested in. And the support that they need looks different from our intercepts. They need mobility support. They need support for aging, for seniors. They skew white, they skew women, they skew older. So kind of to sum up for a minute, I'm just gonna pause here on this slide before I shift it back to our gallery view for discussion and questions. We've been really curious at the Walters about what it would look like to move from our self-service exit kiosk to our newsletter and our newsletter email surveys to a random intercept survey delivered as an exit survey as folks are within the building. And what we've seen in that is that it's not just one audience. And in fact, for those past few years, we were misunderstanding what our audience was looking at our AAM data. We were seeing just a portion, just a segment of the people that we serve and thinking about their needs as representative of the whole. That didn't actually work. So when we transferred to an intercept survey for AAM for this past year, not only did we see what our breadth of community had to say, we were able to compare and look at different audiences that we have across the museum, how they communicate with us, and how that methodology comes into play with understanding who is signing up for our email newsletters, what their needs are, and then who's our general public and what their perhaps very different needs are. So I'll pause there and we can open it up.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Roslyn. Before we get into some questions, hopefully you all have some thoughts. I don't want to dominate this. I do just want to do a few clarifications based on some comments that came in the chat and things I heard. First, so everyone knows, as you could see, those questions are not on the COVES survey, or not all of them, right? Because this is not a COVES data set. This is the annual survey of museum goers that AAM co-sponsors and Wilkening Consulting conducts. It is administered annually, right? Annual survey of museum goers. And Roslyn, this data set came from 2025, right? Not 2026. And it's, in my understanding of the survey, is it's typically conducted in the first few months of the year. So my guess is you were doing data collection in like March and maybe February, maybe April, but in that first portion, spring.
Yeah, correct. And if you try to do this and don't have your resources, you may end up doing it into May and be asking for Susie for an extension, which is what happened to us in 2024. But in 2025, we got it together a little bit more thanks to our wonderful Carol Bates fellow, Beatrice Gerskin. So with thanks to Beatrice for her support on this project.
Great. And because I know some of the Wilkening Consulting methodology, also for everyone to be aware, we're trying to convince Susie to come to our COVES community of practice and talk about how our two studies are not competitive, but are complementary. We're actively looking at the data sets together. So hopefully you all will get that sneak preview sometime in the next few months, but I just want to say we know and respect Susie very much. So these are really good data. One of the things that they offer through the annual survey of museum goers is the broader population. Essentially, it's a panel survey, right? I'm guessing that you did not do that for this data set, correct?
So we did do it for this data
Oh,
set, but
cool.
it's not in the deck. And I'm sorry to say, I was really focusing on the difference between these segments. But one of the beautiful things about this process, if I may, I'm just going to hijack the conversation
Please,
once
yeah.
more briefly, is that when you are using your newsletter sample, right? Or people who are your kind of trusted community who have already gone through the hoops of like going deep with you by signing up, in our case for our email. You have that comparison data versus your general public data, which is your intercept, versus your broader public data, which is the panel survey that Susie offers. And you can really kind of think about that as a funnel. If you are trying to get people kind of down the funnel from like big picture, I think about myself as like maybe museum going, but a very casual visitor. And, the Walters is kind of maybe on my radar, but not really. Too. I showed up at the Walters. I might be a first time visitor. I'm definitely not on your email list. I had a good time. I'm here for social purposes to down the funnel a little further. And it's just really lovely to be able to see the gradation in the data that you get back. So that's my plug for this.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. And I'll make another plug. Going back to this notion that it's complimentary. I think it costs less than $1,500 to participate annually if you join before their early bird deadline, whatever their cutoff is. And again, you don't need to do staffed exit surveys to do this. But as this call clearly demonstrates, there are some big differences in those methods that you need to pay attention to. So that's the whole point of this conversation and the caveat. The most important question that I want to ask before I'll stop talking is, have you compared these data to your COVES data, specifically thinking about those demographics?
I have not compared our demographics yet. Um, I should, and I should have already, but I haven't. I have compared different specific questions that have come up, and I can't think of a particular example, but frequently when questions come in about our audiences, and there's places where I'm like getting data from multiple sources, I'm able to pull COVES and AM data together. And so I would just second the fact that they work in tandem really well, but I have not compared those to my memory. It's been a minute.
Cool. All right, Mary, thank you for plugging the museum goer survey on the web. Let's see, I answered as many of the questions as I could. I love the suggestion of a TikTok survey, although I'm a little scared of what that implies. But I'd like to open it up to all of you, any of you, either to raise questions or comments in the chat or to hop off mute and talk to Roslyn in the group yourself.
I had a question for Roslyn, if she's willing. I was wondering, I saw that you had the two age groups, the 30 and under, and then the 70 and over. What did you find, or did you find anything that will capture that 30 to 70 age range? Or are they just kind of absent, or were they just there but smaller groups? I was curious about that.
Yeah, Susie has a term for it. And I'm looking at Ryan in case you know this term, but I'm gonna butcher it. But essentially it's the kind of period of time in which people are slowing down from museum visitation, either due to families or work or other things, and then they kind of like skyrocket back up. I want to use the term malaise, but that's not maybe the right term. So
It's a good
we
word, though.
it is. We have like looked at that, and what we've talked with Susie about is that kind of spikes on both sides is fairly typical. And so we have yet to kind of capture the middle. And I think some of the data stories that Susie will be putting out this year around the 2026 data set is around families. And I was able to see her presentation at AAM this year. If you were too, you would have noticed that she really hit upon families, which parents are in that kind of that downward kind of slope there, downward valley, because parents are getting hit hard with economics right now. They're points down from they're less likely to be visiting museums at the moment, and specifically like less likely to be visiting museums with entrance fees. So as we were looking at that, kind of how do we support the kind of valley of our age demographic, how do we support specifically families, was our Walters approach for it. May not be everyone's approach, but that's the way we're looking to support that group.
And I clearly blew this too because they had a webinar today too. It was the hour before this. They did exclusive to ASMG participants. So it wouldn't have been broadly applicable, but Susie has been starting to share beyond just the AAM conference some of the findings from this year. And that's exactly right about the families and kind of the frequent visitors. Margaret, would I recommend sending out the COVES survey to your email list once a year? Does that skew everything? I think, and I'd be curious for Roslyn's answer to this question too. It depends on your email list, right? But that sounds to me like kind of a member survey. And it's always a good idea to check in on them. You probably already know some of their demographics just from whatever it takes for member registration. You could get a sense of their visit history and some of their experiences if you don't already capture that through your CRM. I don't think it would add anything to your COVES sample. And if you did integrate it with the random sampling that we do, it would skew things because it would be, as Rosalind's showing pretty clearly, fundamentally a different segment of the audience.
Yeah, I agree, Ryan. I think I'd be curious if for the data's sake, but maybe not for like unless you had a specific application.
Right.
I think it's a curious practice. Yeah.
But I do want to flag from your data, what I observed there too is email participants in general, right? So one of the pros of an email survey is they're more willing to take time to answer some stuff, specifically open-ended questions. So if you want richer qualitative data because you have those specific questions, sitting in front of a keyboard is much different than trying to fill something out on a tablet, phone, iPad, whatever. So there can be a different utility there, but you got to be pretty clear about what you're hoping to learn. Liza, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Before we go to Liza, I just want to flag the other thing is, like I said, the Walters is a free museum. So not everyone's on our email list. If you require email sign up for your tickets, perhaps your data will look quite different from my data when you're thinking about the difference between your intercepts and your email list. Now, just thinking about how email lists work, you're still probably getting one per visit group and it will maybe be the person who wants to give their email versus like a random person within that group with our intercepts. But I know for us, the barriers to getting on our email list or the hoops to jump through really said that you had to be a Walters loyalist and someone who used email frequently. Liza, what's your thoughts?
Hi. I'll give out a name that this is not Susie's name, and this is not my question, but I was thinking the trough of life, which happens between 30 and 70. And I'm just sort of substituting that for that age bracket. But I have a two-part question. One is around selection bias and kind of who's willing to stop. I know you talked about the invisible red line. You have people with time, people in a good mood, traveling without restless kids, or who just feel positively about the place. Are they likelier to participate, and does that skew results? That's one question. And the other was just kind of more generally about intercepts and their benefits, and in capturing kind of immediate behavioral data from broad on-site populations. And what do you think about, or do you think they're defensible and or not when you need representativeness and kind of candid critical feedback, which may be less candid for people who are willing to stop and talk?
So your first question about selection bias and who's willing to stop is something I think about a lot for codes in particular. And so as you heard me say, the Walters is really interested in building our family community and supporting folks in that trough. And so one of the things that I'm looking at is our rejection log and whether or not I'm seeing a difference in the percentage of families showing up on the rejection log versus in the folks who stop. And so within the first 6 months of doing COVES, that was like one of my big questions, and we did not see a difference. They were fairly similar. And so that's something that I kind of keep monitoring, particularly for that group. But when it comes to intercepts and capturing immediate feedback and whether that's representative, I think to me, a representative plus critical feedback is sometimes not the same audience. And so when you look at our Walters data, there are certainly audiences that we're not capturing. We aren't reflective of the city of Baltimore just yet. That is something that we strive to do. So if I want critical feedback, I'm thinking about a broader museum survey that is outside of the Walters, or a focus group or some other way to get outside voices and not just our existing voices. But from an intercept perspective, I do feel like I get a better sense, it's my best bet so far, of getting a broad sample of our existing visitors. And existing visitors is still just one segment in all the audiences that we are trying to reach and understand their perspectives for. Marie, is this a
Barnes
follow-up?
Foundation, keep going.
Yeah.
It's actually a little bit of a different thing, but I agree that like there's I since we've been doing COVES for a year, and just like the representativeness of the intercept data that we've collected feels far more accurate, obviously, than our email data. So, but I have a question as it relates to some things that are coming up in the chat and like the relationship between something like the museum goers survey and COVES. So just for context, we haven't participated in this in a couple of years, the annual survey of museum goers, but we do have like a slightly more barn specific, like custom survey that goes out to people 24 hours after their visit, etc. I'm wondering how, if, for example, we realize like, oh, we're really interested in learning more about people who went to our special exhibition and are like between the ages of 40 and 60 or whatever, because we've considered the incidence of that group within COVES, which we consider to be slightly more representative of our visitorship. Does everyone feel comfortable taking the leap with these like secondary data sets where you might filter down to that group and like still use those responses as an accurate representation of that particular group? Or tell me if I'm like far too deep into like a descriptive place. But I think like the way that the two, just what you've illustrated, Roslyn, and I've seen it in our data as well, like the way that the two data sets are just like there's like not the same feels complicated to then be like, oh, I'm going to filter down on this particular age group and like draw conclusions about that group. Tell me if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does make sense. I'm curious about that application of like by like applying the knowledge of like this one group that we have research on to maybe their experience over here that we haven't done the research on. Is there more there of like,
Yeah, I can give a more concrete example. So, for example, we do like a really detailed qualitative like coding exercise with all of our, I'll just use Calder Gardens as an example because it's on the top of my mind, for all of our comments relating to just the visitor experience in general. And so that I know feels a little bit redundant to COPES, but it's collected separately in this like other data set or this other survey. And so we are like this summer working through like a full analysis of a year's worth of information. We'll obviously see the distribution of like themes and things like that. We'll then I think look at things by demographic considerations and I guess just draw conclusions from those segments that we apply and are interested in. But I'm just curious if anyone has like thought about conclusions are drawing from those like more volunteer bias-y samples compared to something like intercept data collection. anyways, I might have answered my own question, which is like it's okay to be like, filtering down and like looking at things separately and in connected ways. So maybe I'll just like follow up and tell you what we find.
Thank you, Marie.
Can I jump in because I have a thought?
Yeah.
Um, Thank you, Roslyn, first of all. I thought that was great. And Marie, I had a similar sort of question because I am new to data collection. I am not a statistician. And I think a lot of us are in that boat. Data collection in a museum is something that we are doing as part of our larger position. And so we're learning on the fly, a lot of us. We've been collecting data with Coves for 3 years at the Harn. And I feel like I'm finally kind of like getting it and getting into it. And it's interesting thinking about doing the same survey two different ways, because I think in some ways it makes that survey so much more accessible. You're obviously getting answers through email that you wouldn't get through the Intercept survey and vice versa. But then, like, how do you reconcile those things? And I think so. I'm at a point now in my research where I am starting to think about implementing other smaller surveys, like you're talking about at the Barnes. And I think my thought behind that is that I'm going to implement surveys that answer a very specific question for me, so that I think I can still look at both data sets and see how they are similar or different, but that they're really not for comparison, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
like
no,
your
absolutely.
survey, it sounds very general
Yes.
in the way you're explaining it. So I think maybe there's a little more overlap. Um, but I don't know. And that's not even like answering your question. That's just what came to mind when you were talking.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I think it goes back to the point earlier around like an email survey is more like a member survey, et cetera, et cetera. So, yeah, totally. That makes so much sense.
And just to complement this suggestion, because that's exactly right. It sounds like there's more evaluation specific questions that can be answered through other methods. But I love what's happening in the chat here about aligning certain portions of those other survey with the COVES questions so you can make those comparisons, right? Look for those intersections and start doing some mapping, because that's really critical given that COVES is intended to be broad, general, and representative. And seeing the time, I have two observations that I think are really relevant for the whole group based on Roslyn's presentation. Roslyn, you did a really good job of talking about two different audiences, right? Two age groups specifically. And by virtue of that, and you said this yourself, it's two stages of life. But the one that's younger is kind of the future of our museum audiences, and those tended to be much more diverse. So for all of our programming needs, for all of our educational goals, for all of our motivational theories, we have a new audience that is emerging that will be growing and aging into this. And I personally don't believe they're going to just default to the patterns and ways of the older generation. So it's really important to be looking forward. And your data highlights that so well. And piggybacking on this idea of evaluation specific or other types of data collection methods in addition to COVES, it is important, and Roslyn, your data highlighted this too, your casual visitors, right? The younger ones who are less frequently attending. You asked them what could be most improved about the experience, and a large portion of them said nothing, it was great. Something like that, right?
Yeah.
And in that, it got me thinking, like, you don't know what you don't know. So if you came for a social experience and because it's sort of close, but you don't go that often, asking someone a really critical piece of feedback, and Liza, I think this was kind of your question about the candid or critical feedback that you're looking for. It can be really hard for someone to give you that critical feedback when they came for a good time and they made the selection and they're just a casual visitor, which begs the need for additional data collection methods and evaluation processes for getting some of that with specific audiences in mind and deeper questions intended. And I love everyone here, but we've said this about COVES forever, that COVES is not a silver bullet. It doesn't answer every single question you have. It probably will beg more and more and more questions over time that different evaluation services can help with. All right, we got about 2 minutes for any parting thoughts, comments. I also will never mess up the Walters Art Museum again because wham, right?
Wham.
So good.
Well done, Wham.
Wham.
And I think someone had Jenny, you had a question earlier about like the older crew, and I'm just thinking about how using our email newsletter really allowed us to do this oversampling for an older, more loyal crew of visitors. And so, would we go back and do this like would we do a TikTok if we wanted to maybe oversample for that audience and that presumed demographic? Liza.
I do see, I mean, we tend to fall back into the like positioning one method against the other and like which is better. But to me, Coves really champions, mixed methods and multi-method research. I mean, and it's a tool that is both validated and ready, convenient and for kind of the ecosystem of good research design or good evaluation design. It's such a boon for the museum community, and so we like to frame it that way here at the Barnes, that rather than kind of zooming in on intercept versus email versus, because different people are in different places and respond more readily to different channels, and we know that. And TikTok might be the next frontier, but I just wanted to you know offer that as kind of the one framing mechanism we use here.
Thank you, Liza. And we're actually going to capture that first part of your response, and we're going to start sending you to conferences on behalf of Coves to just bring everybody in, right? Okay, well, we're at the hour. This was a really good conversation. Roslyn, we got to have you present more often. Clearly, you're doing something
Thank
really,
you
really
all.
well. But thank you so much. I'll let you say parting words if you'd like, but I'm really appreciative for your presentation, your willingness to share your data, and your expertise today.
Oh, well, thank you. Being part of COVES is such a highlight for me, and I love this community of practice. Thanks for inviting me into this space and giving me an opportunity to share. If you have any questions, I'm throwing my email address in the chat, or find me on LinkedIn. And Jenny, I saw you come off mute, so if there's more you want to chat about, we can always sideline later. So thank
Great.
you all. Have a great one.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon.